Hello everybody, recording live from somewhere. This is Zach Couples with episode number 48 of the Movement Debrief. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, this one's going to be dope as all hell. We're going to talk about leg length discrepancies. Can you measure them? Are they relevant? Do you have one? Find out later. We're going to talk about Voodoo bands. Are these things useful to be utilizing in your plan of care or other types of fare? And last but not least, we're going to talk about FAI, femoral-acetabular impingement. Ow! Pinch to grow an inch. That's what's on docket. These are questions asked by the people, answered for the people, by this people right here, fam recognized fam. Before I dive in, just a little bit of housekeeping. Guys, we are getting a ton of human matrices, but the human matrix is coming your way. 3 different locations this year. September 15th and 16th in Seattle, Washington. I just got a new edition in November. Portland, Oregon, ladies and gentlemen, November 10th and 11th. And I have some signups for that. The last one, which is going to be in October in Kansas City, Kansas, at Move Right KC. Details coming for that, October 27th and 28th. I'll link all that stuff, but please mark your calendars, attend all 3. I don't care, or at least make one of them. But that's what's on docket in terms of life. I hope to see you all there and let the fam grow. Without further ado, though, let's debrief, shall we? First question comes from Gerard, who is a mentee. And I also look forward to meeting him soon. Gerard, I have a question for the debrief tonight if you're taking them. I happen to be. What are your thoughts on the long sit test? Do you find it useful? I have a track girl who has persistent low back pain and always presents with a positive long sit test. Her right leg moves past her left when sitting up from a supine position. She scores a 2 on the Hruska adduction lift test, which I will link in the show notes if y'all don't know what that is. And an Ober's test is positive on the left, and she has a narrow infrasternal angle. Long sit test is a fast test, which you can see and appreciate that there's no chance for a false negative or compensation. Gerard, very good question. Now, when Gerard posted this question to me, I was like, fam, I don't know what the hell the long sit test is, because it's something that I never learned in PT school. And I probably sent him like 25 different back and forths to say, what are you looking at? And he sent me it, and he was just like, sorry, don't waste your time. You're not wasting my time, buddy. But the long sit test, basically what you do is you would lie supine, and I'll link a video of it, but you would lie supine, you would sit up in the long seated position, and you would assess leg length discrepancy. And that is the goal that is the goal of the test, is to assess if there is a leg length issue. So when evaluating a test like that, I have to ask myself, how relevant is a leg length discrepancy? I'm glad I asked myself. So I looked up leg length discrepancy, and I got this study. It's called Methods for Assessing Leg Length Discrepancy. And I will link it in the show notes. But long story short, which by the way, when anyone ever says that, usually it's a long story by the time they say that. This one won't be. Long story short, doesn't seem to be many clinical tests that are worthwhile at assessing a leg length discrepancy, aside from, which is not really a clinical test for most of us jokers, but what do they use? A CT scanogram in standing. Ooh, how sexy does that sound? How many of us got that lying around the clinic? Not I. Probably not you. Is it relevant? Here's the deal. With a lot of these leg length tests that they're trying to measure, even if you do a standing thing and you measure everything all hunky-dory, what you're not taking into account is potential proximal things that could create a leg length discrepancy. If only I had a pelvis model to illustrate this. Oh wait, I do. Except it has a coccyx missing. Fracture? I don't know. What's the deal, Sawbones? I just bought this. Anyways, let's assume there was a femur right here. And let's say I anteriorly rotate this innominate just like so. Sorry about that. I tilt this bad boy forward, or I anteriorly rotate the innominate. What's going to happen is the femur, if it was here, would follow the acetabulum upward or superior. Would this not make the left leg appear shorter than the right? I think it would. So if we have not addressed proximal positioning or orientation, and why would this happen? Well, this would happen because of things going on at the axial skeleton, or, well, I don't know, maybe something about an infrasternal angle. Check the show notes if you want to learn more, fam. But consider that there's all these other factors that are not being taken into account when assessing a leg length discrepancy. So if you haven't accounted for proximal positioning and orientation, why are you measuring leg length? I don't care about it. You got to care about that and addressing variability first and foremost before you even think that something like this is relevant in most people. I will go into cases where it might be relevant a little bit later. Another thing to consider, most of the people who are dealing with some leg length issues or who come to see you and say, oh, you know, whoever told me I have a leg length discrepancy. Most of them are not these dramatically weird gaits, like maybe like some individuals who have some type of hip dysplasia or leg calf perthes or some type of pathology that has occurred up the chain. Like those are individuals where I can see like a leg length issue being, you know, something that needs some type of intervention. But most of these people who are coming to see you are just normal everyday Joes and Jills like yourself and myself. Although I'm a normal everyday Zach, I guess. These people, are leg length discrepancies relevant, clinically relevant? In most cases, no. In most individuals, we all have a little bit of a side-to-side difference in leg length, or differences in side-to-side in terms of bone length, of specific bone. I think that's fairly normal. There is a fairly normal occurrence for one hemipelvis to have a different size than another hemipelvis. Also, normal occurrences. Are these clinically meaningful? Are these things that we can change? Probably not. And they're probably not relevant because if they did have a legit leg length discrepancy, they probably have always had that. And a lot of times if you address proximal orientation by building variability and reestablish conditioning, among other things, a lot of times that is completely irrelevant. The only times when it is irrelevant, and if there is some pathology that has occurred, whether it's something like I said, leg calf perthes, or you have someone who's got a, what the heck is it called, where the femur loses its blood supply. I'm blanking on the name, man. But whenever that happens and there's been some structural damage at the hip, then maybe leg length matters. But there's nothing you're going to do about it. You know, sticking a heel lift on one side is not going to fix that problem. What's probably going to have to fix that problem is eventually, if proximal stuff has been addressed or variability has been addressed and there's still issues, is surgery. And sometimes surgery fixes things. And if there's one area that it seems to fix things more often than not, if you pick the right procedure, which doesn't always happen, is hip surgery. A lot of these people, if they get it at the right time and they get the right, thank you, avascular necrosis, Jordan. Man, I gotta like the hell out of that. Thank you, man, I'm blanking. Have too much caffeine, not enough sleep. Like in some people, total hips work. Like I have a guy right now, and this guy had like, you know, a little leg length issue, but he had a back surgery and messed up the nerves that innervated the hip joint, and so he developed an AVN, avascular necrosis. I saw him pre-op, and like, bro was not walking good. He hadn't really walked much in about 9 years. I mean, that just really sad story that this happened to this guy. And so what we did, or what he did, was he got total hip. Didn't get my favorite approach. Posterior approach is not necessarily the one I recommend for most people. But he got that done, and I measured his range pre-surgery and post-surgery. And just after the surgery, guy had way less pain, a lot more range of motion, especially in external and internal. And I mean, it's going to change this guy's life, assuming things go smoothly. So with cases like that, where you have maybe a severe leg length discrepancy because of some bony morphological change, surgery helps. So don't be poo-pooing surgery too much. Although if you do have to have a whole total hip, side note, get the anterior lateral. Like, don't cut your glutes. Come on, people. So to summarize that point, I don't put much stake in leg length discrepancies, at least the minute clinical ones that we may tell ourselves that we see. Where it may matter is if there is some type of structural pathology going on with that leads to a severe leg length issue, in which maybe something like a shoe lift or something wild and crazy, or even something like congenital, like a hip dysplasia or something. Those would be cases where like this is relevant and maybe something needs to be done to fix that, whether it's a shoe lift in the short term or surgery in the long term. But the ones we measure clinically, we don't have a good clinical test to diagnose it. If we address a lot of the basics, most of the time it's not relevant. Gerard, good question. Next question comes from Tyler. Tyler asks, what are your thoughts on Voodoo floss / compression bands? Well, before I go into my thoughts, I did a scouring of the research before I got here. I couldn't find a whole lick of anything on these things in terms of if they're effective or not. But if you don't know what a Voodoo band is, or a floss band, basically what it is it's this rubbery band that you would wrap around a limb of some sort to compress the tissues. A lot of times they'll do various mobility exercises while you're wearing them, or manual therapy, blah, 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 blah. And maybe that helps with range of motion, feelings of tension in a given area, and possibly swelling. I don't use these much now. In terms of the research, there's not much supporting that these guys work. Doesn't mean you don't, but there's not much that I found in the research. I don't use them much right now clinically because with the current population who I work with, these people need the basics. They need conditioning, they need variability establishment, they need to sleep, and they need to not eat like crap. And I don't also see a lot of acute injuries, so I don't see much use for the Voodoo bands. When I did use them a decent amount was when I was in the league. The times that I would use them would be if someone has an acute injury and there's swelling in the area. Sometimes I would do the Voodoo floss compression band along where the injury had occurred or where the swelling was present, and I would do just some light massage to see if we could expedite the removal of swelling. Did it work? I don't really know. Swelling is a tough one for me, and the reason why it's a tough one for me is because I haven't read much of anything that's effective for swelling. Aside from, believe it or not, I'd have to really dig to find the research, but interferential seems to actually help. Compression, depending on who you read, may or may not help. But when you have the luxury of time, which I did in these cases, you throw just about anything you can to get this person on the court as quickly as possible. And when I had time, and if time is a luxury, it might not be a bad thing to try. I will say sometimes when you do put these compression bands on people and you have them perform a given movement, because it changes the context of the movement in some way that we probably don't know fully. We can say neurophysiological response, but what the hell does that mean? I want more specific than that. But sometimes if you put a compression band on someone and have them do a movement, that will be less painful. Just like manual therapy, just like changing what they're doing ever so slightly. Like sometimes that changes the context enough that you can have less pain. I'm trying to think of an example that I had in the clinic this week. Like I was having a patient do an activity and they were adducting the femur and they got a little bit of knee pain while they did that. I literally had them bend the knee about 10 degrees more and that fixed it. Now, did that 10 degrees make just this incredible kinematic difference that put just the knee in such a beautiful position that it allowed things to work as needed and lead to less pain? Hell if I know. what likely happened is this was a different contextual way that person was moving, and it led to a reduction in pain and less threatening somehow, that I don't know. And I think you could put compression in the same thing. I think you could put manual therapy in the same thing. Like a lot of Mulligan stuff, the mobilization with movements. You're not changing a positional fault. He talks like that if you listen to him on the video. But what you're likely changing is just the context in which that person moves. And I think a Voodoo band works along a similar mechanism. It can be effective for certain people by doing that. So to summarize, Voodoo bands, don't use them a whole lot, but I've used them in the past for edema management. Did it help? Does it help give you another option of changing movement context to help someone with pain? Absolutely. So give it a shot, see if it works. It's not my first go-to. I still think you got to address the basics, variability, power, capacity. But if you have someone who's got a painful movement and you've tried to coach every different variation that you could, nothing changes, maybe wrap it up and see what happens. Good question, Tyler. Last question comes from Jordan. FAI, can you speak your recommendations for working with those experiencing either CAN, pincer, or both FAI? For my approach, I usually mobilize medial muscles, adductors, then look to establish lumbo-pelvic hip stability with a lateral focus. Tell us yours. Good luck with the move. Yes, this while back, the move was a success. FAI. So what is FAI? Femoral-acetabular impingement. Basically, impingement means bones are hidden when they shouldn't be hidden. In the hip in particular, there's two types of impingements. I'll link pictures in the show notes, but there is a cam impingement. Cam impingement is when there is, here's my pelvis, an acetabular change. So there's some type of bony change along the acetabulum that when the femur moves on the acetabulum, there's contact of the bones. We don't always like that. Maybe leads to pain. You're not going to change that. The other thing, the pincer impingement, would be when, if there was a femur here, I'll get the femur one day, guys. But if there was a femur here, there is some bony change or bony growth on the femur. Femur moves, ding, hits the acetabulum. Problems ensue. In terms of changing that structure, unless you're a surgeon, good luck. And if you are a surgeon, you don't have much luck. Because I was reading this study. It's called Multi-Center Outcomes of Arthroscopic Surgery for Femoral-Acetabular Impingement in the Community Hospital Setting. And it doesn't look too good. Well, there's some self-reported percentage of improvement with this surgery. We're looking at like maybe a 73.5% change in pain. Not bad. 76.2%, I think it's percent change in ADLs, and 68.6% in sport. Hey, maybe this stuff works. Satisfaction. Cool. Shooting a rock solid 64%. I would not be satisfied with that satisfaction score if I was a physician. So does the surgery work? I'm sure it does for some people, but it's definitely not your first go-to. What I think needs to be a go-to, first and foremost, is guess what? Spoiler alert, variability. We need to keep looking at this. So can the hip joint move in all directions? Flexion, extension, AB, AD, IR, ER. Can we restore that? Let's try and give it a shot. What I would do in most of these cases is activities geared towards that. Now, impingements can be a little bit on the tricky side of things. I think that with some of the traditional things you would use, or the traditional sequencing of exercises that you may use, you may not necessarily be able to go in the order that you normally would. I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm doing a side-lying activity. PRI's got a good one, adductor pullback. I'll link it in the show notes. But basically what you're doing with the adductor pullback, and I can probably demo it here-ish, or I'll do a hip shift. Let's just do that, some type of hip shift. You might not be able to see me on camera. So let me just tilt that down. Sorry for the crop shot. Unless you're into that, then I'm not sorry. But basically what you would do is, if, let's say I'm doing something with my left hip, I'm going to push my left hip back, all right? This would be the innominate doing this, posteriorly rotating. I'm shifting back this way. This would be a relative internal rotation of an acetabulum moving on a femur. I can also do, so for those at home, bam, there. I can also do this. I can IR my femur, which would also create that same action. Right? Now, here's the deal. Let me raise the camera up. There we go. Cool. Here's the deal with that. Sometimes when people do that shift, they get a pinch. Ow. We don't want that. So if I am doing that shift that I just demoed for you guys, and I get a pinch, you gotta do something else to work around that. A lot of times, it's a pretty simple fix. Instead of doing, sorry guys, I just had to adjust the camera. There we go. Instead of doing this movement first, the shift back, what you might consider instead is moving the femur into internal rotation first. So if I'm doing a standing thing, instead of doing that shift of the hip back first, I IR the femur, then I shift back. So you change the sequencing of things. Maybe what that does is it allows you, or allows the femur or the acetabulum, wherever the impingement is, to clear where the impingement would normally be, and then you are able to perform the action without pain and feel the muscles that you need to feel. I could argue the same thing if I'm doing the opposite, like say I'm doing a right clamshell or something along those lines, which I'll link in the show notes. But with that, typically what you would do is you would shift this hip forward and then externally rotate the femur. Well, sometimes you can get pinching with that as well. What would you do in that case? Externally rotate first, then shift. That's really the simple fix. And in both of those cases, if I'm doing the former, the pullback, I'm trying to restore adduction and internal rotation. In the latter, the right clamshell, or the clamshell, I would be restoring external rotation and abduction. So think about, for these cases, when you're restoring range of motion, you get what you need, but maybe go out of order than what you would normally do. So instead of maybe going adduction IR, you're doing IR and adduction. It's just applying a different context under the movement so that the pinch is not reproduced. With any of the activities that you're trying to do when you're working with someone who's got a cam or a pincer lesion, you want to make sure that pinching is not reproduced and they're feeling what they need to feel. Sometimes, I had one guy who actually, this would have been a couple years ago, who did have this surgery. Actually did pretty well, but he did have a shaving of that. He had such little adduction that anytime I put him into anywhere near, close to even going into the adduction range, he had pain. And I did exactly what I was showing you guys, a hip shift, but instead of putting him in adduction and range of motion, I abducted this femur like crazy, and I did the stretch into that position with the femur abducted. Guess what happened when we did that? He felt what he needed to from a stretch standpoint, and they were able to get him to adduct fully without pain. So you kind of have to play around with these people and see what sequencing of the hip range of motion that you're utilizing can lead to getting access to the range of motion that they might not be able to, that could potentially be contributing or enhancing the pain experience that they may be getting secondary to an impingement. So, quick summary of that is, if you have someone who's got an impingement, maybe you don't go to surgery, but what you do is you drive the motions that you need at the hip joint by addressing variability. And if your traditional way that you're trying to get that motion doesn't work, flip-flop the order to a degree to see if that helps instead. So instead of doing an acetabular movement first, maybe you're doing a femoral movement, then following with an acetabular movement. And a lot of times if you do that, you ought to be in business. Now, one thing with these people is a lot of times if the impingement is bad enough, or the FAI is bad enough, like maybe down the line, total hip replacement is something that's going to be in their future, which is sad to say. In fact, in that study, which I'll link, the multi-center outcome one, I believe it was like, I don't know how long they followed these people. I'd have to read a little bit more in depth, so I apologize, but I just wanted to expose you guys to this. I think 7.5% of those people ended up needing a total hip, which is, a decent amount. I don't know how old these guys were. The age range looked like it was pretty varied. Yeah, I mean, the mean was like, the age was 13 years old to 73. That's a pretty substantial range of motion, or a pretty substantial age range. So I would envision that a larger degree, if the lesions are bad enough, would need a total hip arthroplasty. But I'll tell you what, if you're going to get any total joint surgery, that would be the one to get. Just make sure you get an anterior or an anterior lateral. So those would be kind of my things when we're talking about FAI. I hope that was helpful. Hang on, Loretta asked one question on that Instagram, baby. What if you have no hip or a joint and a femur been cut in half and wired together? Wow. So Loretta asked, in this case, what if you have no hip or a joint and a femur have been cut in half and wired together? That's an interesting question. So I've never worked with anyone who's had either of those things, but I could see myself doing this. That's crazy, Loretta. Wow. I've never worked with anyone personally who has no hip. So, I mean, there's some individuals who have to have an amputation for whatever reason that completely eliminates the hip joint. But a lot of times what they will still have is this bad boy. And you can still do movements that involve the innominate moving, especially if it's only one side. Me doing something on, let's say the left hip was gone. Me doing something on the right side, so if I'm doing an anterior or a posterior rotation of the innominate, has to lead to the opposite action going on the same side, unless you're doing a bilateral movement like a squat. So a lot of times so if it's right side in this person, let's say this is gone. If I do something on the left, so I do a posterior rotation activity of the innominate, that's going to lead to a relative anterior rotation of this one. So you can still get the muscle actions kicking into high gear on the involved side, or the right side in this case, to still potentially elicit some changes. That's how I would treat this individual. In terms of the hip joint cut in half and wired together, I think I would have to see what the kinematics look like, or what testing looks like, if they have any type of appendage to move, to see what we would do. But the treatment would be very, very similar in terms of what I would do for that person, whether they had a hip or whether they didn't. You're still addressing things at the hip as best you can. They still have a thorax that you can address. And a lot of times if you do these things and do the best you can with whatever prosthesis they are utilizing to move around, I still think you can get a lot of positive adaptations. In fact, if you follow some of the PRI people, I think Ron actually got a lot of his start with working with people who had amputations of various degrees. And we still have the thoraco-abdominal pelvic cavity that we can impact on these people. So even if there is not an appendage to work with, you still have that cavity that you can make substantial changes with. So that's what I would recommend for those cases. Loretta, really good question, and best of luck if that's you, or if you're working with someone who is dealing with that. But I think that's probably a good stopping point for us tonight. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you want to learn more, just hit me up at zachcouples.com. Subscribe to my newsletter, where you can get a bunch of free talks, free stuff, weekend goodies from me, all types of wild stuff. And once you are done with that, I would go check out my services page. Let's try that again. See what you can get from me. What I can do for you are 3 big things. At least 3 things. We could do a movement consultation where if you're a little toy, not moving as well as you'd like to, I can help you move a little bit better. Or maybe you're hurting and you want to say, hey, you know, maybe if my movement got a little bit better, I'd probably move a little bit better. Probably. Wait. Yes, you know what I mean, or feel better. You get it. Hit me up for a movement consultation. I also offer mentoring. If you want to do some of the stuff that I was talking about today and see if you can apply that with your clients, but you're uncertain where to start, or you want to conceptually understand it a little bit better, or you know, you're a trainer and you want to get your people squatting better and you try coaching the hell out of them, you don't know where to go next, I can help you with that. Definitely hit me up for the mentorship program. Last thing I can do, fitness training. So you're post-rehab. Say you want to get gains or you want to do some fat loss kind of things. I can help you with that. Definitely hit me up for online fitness training. Otherwise, guys, if you want to learn more, hit me up on social media. Facebook /ZCouples. Twitter, the handle is @ZCouples. Of course, that Instagram, baby. Hit me up, Zach, ZAC Couples, CUPPLES. And on YouTube, if you search Zach Couples, subscribe to my channel, you'll get access to exercises. If you want to check out some of the other movement debriefs, in fact, there's 47 others, and you don't want to look at me, why wouldn't you? If you don't want to look at me, though, subscribe to the Zach Couples Show on either iTunes or Stitcher. You can listen to me, bring me in your car. I like long walks on the beach and long trips across the country. Great to take. And, you know, if you get tired of listening to me, you can always just hit pause. But thank you guys so much for tuning in tonight. I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Keep it real, but not to the extent where things go wrong. Stay hungry, stay learning, stay moving, and I'll see you next time. Deuces.